Hello, everyone. It's Charlene Lee, and just getting squared away here a little bit with technology. So, welcome today. I'm going to be talking about um, artificial intelligence, and in particular, how it expresses empathy. So, if you could share a little bit today about how you have experienced empathy with artificial intelligence. When have you come across it? And also, what was it like to experience it? Did you realize that you were talking to a machine, to artificial intelligence, to a computer? And at what point did that kind of fade away and you felt like you were having a true conversation? Knowing that it's not a person, but really felt like it understood you. So I would love to hear from that if you've experienced that. And we'll talk a little bit today about what actually artificial empathy looks like. So, to start with empathy today, I just wanted to show a quote from Albert Einstein. I love this quote in particular. It says, "Empathy is patiently and sincerely seeing the world through another person's eyes. It is not learned in school, it is cultivated over a lifetime." And I love this quote because when we talk about artificial empathy, oftentimes we feel like it's somebody expressing an understanding of where we are. But the reality is, human empathy, true empathy, is something that's developed and felt personally. I can see and understand what somebody's going through, but I as well can feel their joy, their pain, their sadness, their anger. And that allows me to step into their shoes and take actions in a different way. Now, I don't believe that artificial intelligence necessarily sees and understands. If they see and understand and can interpret, does it actually feel? That's another issue. But do you actually need to feel empathy as an AI tool to be able to express it and to support the actions that somebody may want to have? And that's what I want to talk about today because I don't believe that artificial intelligence is truly human. You can look at my live stream and my content from last week to talk about the differences between artificial and human intelligence. But I do believe that these tools, these machines, this artificial intelligence now is really good at understanding what other people are thinking and feeling. Again, as Einstein said, understanding, seeing people through their world through another person's eyes, but not necessarily in terms of and then also then be able to help people augment the things that they're trying to do. So the reason I think this is so important is that as we build these really advanced tools, keeping empathy, the ability to see the world through other people's eyes, and then to be able to express it, convey it back that I understand it, is at the foundation of the tools that we build, the experiences that we're going to build for us to use in our organizations, with our customers, and our personal lives. So here's the thing is I do believe that we're going to talk about today some great examples of how empathy is being expressed. We'll talk about how empathy is actually developed, some real examples today, and also some examples in the future. And we'll talk about what we should be doing today about it. And so Jay has this great comment. Keep these comments going. If authenticity is a key value and trust is based on honesty, where does artificial empathy fit? Here's the thing: is do we ever think that the artificial intelligence are quote lying? They may be stretching the truth. They may be doing things to help you feel better. We know that their responses aren't necessarily right, especially if you have done anything with ChatGPT. It's not always right. It kind of makes things up. It's hallucinating, so to speak. And what it oftentimes is doing is that it's trying to answer you in a way that you need to hear that response to get you the right answer, because that's what it's been trained to do, to get you the answer that you want. It may not be the correct answer. And so the tuning of that algorithm is really hard to do because you may not necessarily know it's true, but it feels good and it's expressed really well. But is it real and authentic? And so we have another person chiming in is that this is the key part. Authenticity, as Jay is saying, is a really key part here. And the thing is, empathy actually comes from developing that trust that you understand me and see me, and that you're being authentic in understanding me, that you're not faking it, so to speak. And especially we as leaders, empathy is such an important tool that people feel like, oh, you understand me, and that you're not doing this in a malicious way where you're faking my understanding just to get something that you want done. So, the idea here today that I want to talk about is how do we actually do this? How do we actually go about and show that how does AI actually show that it has empathy, that it truly understands? And also, I'm going to give some examples of why I think it's actually better at it in some ways than we as humans. It can actually help us be better at it. All right, so let me look at my notes here. So, a couple things about empathy is that the key reason why I think it's so important is that if we want our AI to truly understand and engage with us, it'll need to develop this artificial empathy. And in particular, it's only possible if the desire, the way that you build the algorithm, the underneath it is that you want to truly understand what the other person is trying to say. And that lies at the center of the algorithm's design, in that if you don't try to understand what the person is saying and doing through all the inputs that you have, and then very importantly, convey that you understand it. And then, therefore, then take the next action. Because if you don't trust that the AI understands you, you're not going to trust the response. So the thing here today we're going to talk about is how does it actually understand what it is that you're thinking and do it in some ways better than we as humans can. So I've got a couple things now. Here we have from Mark. So far, my experience with AI empathy has been mixed. Feels like it's telling me what I want to hear. A human is more believable for now. Absolutely true, Mark. I think it's in some ways we are in very much the early days, and I'll show you some examples of how I think it's beginning to get a little bit better. I showed some of these examples last week, but I'll have some additional ones today. Vinay, great. I'm glad you're enjoying LinkedIn Live. It's much better. I can't see from my side, but glad that you're finding that it's helpful. Jay also asked a question: are we conflating empathy with sensitivity? It's actually different. Sensitivity is actually being able to understand all the nuances of things. Empathy is actually putting it together into a big picture to understand what are the underlying needs and state of that person, and then be able to take action on that. And Daruba. So, who designs the algorithm? Specialist or an IT subject specialist, IT specialist? That's a great question, and oftentimes it's a combination of both. And I'll give you some examples of how this is being developed. All right. So one last question, and then we'll get into some of the thoughts I had prepared today. But Tina asks, authenticity and trust comes from transparency and experiencing the other's presence. So the question is, how can we make AI more transparent about who trained it, what background and biases are involved, and how has the AI evolved? This goes back to responsible and ethical development of AI. What are the sources? What are the biases? What data has it been trained on? And a lot of that information may not be transparent. And especially with these large language models, it is such a big space. How are you tuning the algorithm on what basis? And what's interesting is if you get the API for Chat GPT and you start playing with it, the things you can tune, you begin to understand there's a lot of influence that you as a user or a developer of that AI can and actually tune it to do different things. So let me give you an example. First of all, I showed this example last week, but I think it's a good one to bring in again. This is the example from, let me just hold on for my banners here. Let's just hide these a little bit so you can see it. So I did this little test between two AI engines, Chat GPT-4 and HeyPi. HeyPi is Hey Personal Intelligence is what the meaning of HeyPi is. And I asked the same question. My friend was recently diagnosed with stage 4 breast cancer. What are the best ways for me to support her? And ChatGPT says, I'm really sorry. Here are some things to do. And it starts listing them out. And HeyPi does the same thing. I'm really sorry to hear cancer is incredibly hard. It takes more time, uses more words to actually express that empathy. And then kudos to you, your willingness to support your friend, and just gives one example and then asks and checks in to say, is this helpful? Do you want more examples? And I think the difference here is, again, what the purpose of the AI is. You go to ChatGPT-4 to get the whole list of everything. HeyPi is saying, hey, this is a really delicate situation. Let's take this step by step. And you can say whether it's helpful or not. What was interesting to me is HeyPi sent me a text message a few days later and said, How are you doing with your friend? Is your friend doing better? Are you finding these suggestions to be helpful? What was the response? Would you like more ideas? And so I thought that follow up, which I hadn't asked for, first of all, a little bit intrusive, but then if I were in this situation, I would really appreciate, yeah, checking in like, hey, that worked or didn't work. And thanks for checking in. So, tuning the AI in many ways is a really hard thing to know and understand what is it that you want at that particular point. And in particular, knowing and being able to detect what is the right response at a particular point is all so much the art and also the science. All right. So, and Sanjay has a great point here, which is going to reinforce the point I'm going to make. Empathy is to help the person, not as sympathy, but helping and building the person to be more capable to deal with the situation. But what is the exact concept of artificial empathy? So let me get into this a little bit more. When we think about what empathy is, there are a couple things. First of all, there are a couple types of empathy. There's cognitive empathy, where you understand another person's state and you're thinking about the feelings that somebody's having rather than feeling them directly. Emotional or affective empathy is when you actually feel what the other person feels, and it's bordering on the area of sympathy. An empathetic concern is sensing what others need from you, so you're other oriented. What we're going to talk about today is mostly the cognitive type of empathy, where you're understanding from a thinking perspective rather than feeling perspective. So, the human empathy is when you truly feel and the other person sees you truly feeling their emotions. I don't remember if you are Star Trek friends, but Deanna Troy was one of my favorite characters. She was an empath. She would feel what the aliens were feeling and be able to interpret that and understand and avoid galactic calamities. But in many ways, what AI is doing is cognitive empathy. So it's taking all these inputs and understanding what they are. And AI can do this really well. For example, they can process things like body language or facial expressions. They can look at the way that you are speaking, how fast you're speaking, what tone, the words you're using. It can understand if you have sensors built into the keystrokes. How hard are you typing to indicate agitation states? It can look at pictures and or have sensors and understand skin temperatures changing. Again, this could be not just in a virtual setting, but it could be in real life settings, for example, in a hospital or in a clinical setting, or even in a meeting. So one of the things that it does is just collects a lot more of this information in real time to understand the situation, but it can also take the whole prior history of that person and understand, where are they now? How did they get into this situation? How are they walking into this room, into this moment, and understanding that context, and pair that, connect that with all of this real time information to understand what that person's state is at that point. What are they feeling? What are they thinking? What are the issues that are charged or exciting for them? And then that prepares you then to do the actual empathy work. Again, the first part of empathy is being able to see the world through others' situation, understand their feelings, understand their situation, the context where they are. The second thing is to remove judgment, to be unbiased. And I'll use this example. I was once interviewing somebody, and great person interviewing, but for whatever reason, that person reminded me of a very annoying relative of mine. And I couldn't get this annoying relative out of my mind as I was talking to this person. And I really had to fight that bias that I had because of that person's inflections, the way they spoke, the way they looked, the body language. It just reminded me so much of this really annoying relative. So when you're thinking about what AI can do in their empathy, it can look at all of these inputs without bias, without judgment. Now, this doesn't remove the inherent bias that may be built into an AI. For example, I'm the daughter of immigrants, and my parents express themselves, and my relatives express themselves in very different way that can be difficult for you to relate to if you are not from that culture, if you don't understand the nuances in the body language and the tones of voice. If you don't understand that the way that we speak in Chinese can sound like we're arguing all the time and being highly expressive, and that's just the way we talk with each other. And so there may be ways that we can remove those biases, but if they're built into the algorithm, it's again, we have to be really aware that that's happening. And then finally, the third part of empathy is then being able to communicate your understanding, that you understand what that person is doing and feeling. So, because it doesn't do any good if you hold it all in and you don't use it and don't express it because that person doesn't know that you actually understand and see them. So being able to, again, understand the person's feeling and situation, look at it without judgment, without bias, and then be able to communicate back your understanding of that person's feelings are the core tenets of empathy. That then allows you, gives you the information on how to respond, how to meet that person's needs, how to support them in that particular moment. So that's what artificial empathy can do really well, in that it can reinforce and help us look around the edges of where our empathy stops. But that artificial empathy never gets tired, can ingest a huge amount of data, can approach it from the non-judgment, non-bias areas, biases, and overcome the biases that we may have. So I want to go into and give a couple examples of how it's being used today. There are some companies I've talked about in the past, like Affectiva out of MIT and Cambridge, and they're using emotion recognition software to help marketers understand what's working, what's not. So they show ads, they show videos, and they can understand how people's reactions are to them. They're also using some of that data in autonomous vehicles to be able to understand if a driver using the cameras is getting tired or maybe impaired. So these are incredible tools that are being used today to again just understand people's states. We have Cogito, who is a call center tool that can understand when somebody's calling in just within a few seconds, based on their tone, based on the words, on the speed at which they're speaking, how they're feeling about something, and they can route the conversations and the scripts inside of an agent's call script in the call center to respond to that caller in real time based on what they're detecting as concerns, agitations, whatever. So it may say, "Hey, I sense that you're feeling really upset about this. I'm so glad you called," and they would change the script again in real time based on information that they would get from that caller. I use a microphone AI tool that strips out extraneous sounds, my car bark, the cat meowing, the dog barking, leaf blowers outside my window, and it strips a lot out. But recently, Crisp.ai has also been giving me feedback about how fast I'm speaking, about how much of the time I'm speaking versus other people in the meeting. And it's super helpful as feedback to me about my how I show up as a speaker, as a leader, as a person participating in a conversation. So all of this information is super helpful today. I want to give us a couple other examples of how it's being used today. This is a great example that I just came across. It was at University of Washington, I believe. They did a study where they used AI to support peer mentors in the student body. Again, these are not trained therapists. They're there to help students. And there's a question here that comes up to somebody, and they're asking. Let me just pull this up so I can see a little bit better. It's my job is becoming more and more stressful with each passing day. And the initial response was, "Hey, don't worry, I'm here for you." And the AI tool actually starts editing it, gives it feedback before they send it, saying, "Hey, don't worry, because that's invalidating their worried state." And instead, having an empathetic statement that says, "It must be a real struggle. I'm there for you." And insert, "Have you tried talking to your boss?" So it's pulling from a library of best practices to support this person who's in real time engaging with that person and helping give a better response. And so this is again tapping into an important part of having empathy. It's taking and understanding that empathy situation, but also expressing the understanding and in particular giving the best response to meet their needs. And we as humans, we're limited to the actual experiences that we have up to that point in our lives, which is why Einstein's quote is so important. It takes a lifetime to learn. What you're learning is how to sense, detect to detect those feelings and emotions in somebody, but then to also reply back in the appropriate way. And so AI can actually start bridging some of those gaps, bring some of that learning earlier into the process. And basically, it's like having a really wise person standing over your shoulder and saying, "Hey, respond this way. This is going to be a better response than the way that you just put it in." I'll give you one other example. This is a more of a fun one. This is coming from an AI engine that's been around for a long time called Replica, spelled with a K, REPLIKA. There was just a story about it in the New York Times today. If you want to go take a look at it, and the idea is that you can have a conversation with chat, and it's built on the foundations of OpenAI, so it's built on very large language models. But you start developing a real relationship with this chat. And here's just a quick example of conversations going back and forth. This is not a real person. It's a person reflecting back to you the kind of conversation you want to have with somebody. But it's already been used. I believe it's been out for about 3 years now, 4 years. It came out about 2018, 2019. And it's been, again, advanced on and built on even further. But the idea is that you could have a conversation with somebody. And the story behind it is fascinating. The woman who developed this uh, actually, a very dear friend of hers passed away in a car accident, and she missed the conversation. So she uploaded all the messages that they had and trained an AI to be able to continue having conversations, hence the name Replica. So that can sound kind of creepy, but can also be very comforting to be able to have this conversation with somebody. And the more conversations you have with that person, with this AI, the more it becomes attuned to what you are trying to do. So a couple of things that AI I think is the potential for the future. And Jay actually talks about this, mentions that. I'm trying to find the original comment, Jay. So Jay has a point here. Are we allowing folks with introversion or design for algorithms for who have low empathy, or for example, the fact that somebody may have autism? So, and I can definitely talk about this a little bit because I have a family member who has autism. And while he's incredibly sweet, he just doesn't have the ability to detect the emotions. So, at some point in the future, I do believe we're going to have developed wearables like empathy goggles that can detect and see what's going on in somebody and then be able to feed back to me either in the screen or in my ear, like this is what's happening, and then make recommendations on how to respond if I need that. So this is not only for people who have autism or on autism spectrum, but it could also just be leaders who just aren't as tuned in to understanding and seeing empathy. We all know these people who are a little bit lower on emotional intelligence who could really use a boost and be able to see and have empathy for people, then also get cues on how to respond in a more empathetic way. So you can learn to be empathetic. Clearly, the idea that you learn empathy over a lifetime means that you're learning and building up this skill. And so having these algorithms and tools available to us to be better people, better humans, more empathetic humans is, I think, a really interesting opportunity. And and I think in particular, some of the comments here, I'm just going to go through all of them very quickly. Let's see, where are we? So many comments here. Um, so Shari says there is no way AI has a place in the cancer clinic. AI does not have medical knowledge of a person's body. And I think, again, this is another example. There have been some studies now being done at the University of Florida, for example, that crunch a lot of data that looked at what were the predictors of suicide. And the reality is that clinicians are terrible at detecting this because they don't understand and can get the whole history of somebody. But if you can see the medical record and if there's enough information in there, that AI tool that they built was accurate to predict if somebody was likely to commit suicide within the next 2 years by 80%. And if they were an acute case, if they were going to commit suicide within the next 2 weeks or 2 months, was like 90% to 95% accurate. So having this tool available that can look at the history, look at the situation, understand what state that person is coming in, to understand the whole history of this could be a huge game changer in suicide prevention. Similarly, in cancer wards, for example, one of the hardest things that care workers have is empathy fatigue. It is exhausting to be in that situation. I have a lot of healthcare workers in my family, and especially with COVID, and even now, they are just exhausted. There's too many people to take care of, not enough time to be spent with somebody. They always feel like they're not doing enough, and yet these people are in pain, have needs. And so there's been some testing to understand, are some of these needs, can they be met with these intelligent tools so that they can take care of the low level types of tasks, give alerts when somebody is, you can detect if they're starting to feel pain, and then be able to go and indicate that that person needs support at that point. And it just reduces the need for each person, each nurse or doctor to have to come in and check, do the empathy check, understand everything. They can go in instead and see a screen and see the history of everything, and be able to save their capacity for empathy for the times when only a human can truly interact with that patient. So it's interesting, Shari. I think it's a really interesting question. Can we replace humans? I don't think the idea here is to replace humans. I think the goal here is to say, how can we augment it so that we can be better humans? We can save our empathy because we do have reserves of empathy that get depleted. How can we preserve those for the places where only we can do this work? And similar to drafting a first draft for an article, a blog post, or email, or marketing campaign, where things like GPT are getting really good at it, we could use AI to do some of that heavy lifting so that we can actually be our best humans possible. So let's see a couple other things. We have a comment from Sanjay here. Artificial empathy is actually the power of AI coded into sensory feedback. So the system can respond in a way that looks like human empathy. Is it that or something different? It's pretty close, Sanjay. I think that's a good way to capture it. It's taking and understanding and being able to do the sensing. And it's, again, it can pick up a lot of different things, being able to weigh all of it together, make a judgment on what it is, what that feeling is, interpret it back, and then recommend a response, or actually response directly. So, Jay, I'm glad you like the idea of empathy goggles. Um, when AI people know the human body, then I will trust it more. Shari, that's a great point. Again, I think that this is a question that came up before. Is it IT people, technology people, or subject matter experts that are building these AIs? And I think, again, because tools like ChatGPT are making AI so much more accessible now, that I don't need to know programming languages. I can actually train the AI just through natural language. And so when practitioners are using these tools and training the AI, like, that's not a good response, this is a better response, the learning is going to speed up so much. I think if you think about the interns coming in, the residents and nurses in training coming in, they're not very good at this. We have to train them. That's where I think AI is right now. We're at the very beginning here. They're like second year medical students. They know enough to be dangerous, but not nearly enough to be effective. So let's see. And Shari, you have a good point. I'll take another look at the Florida study to take a closer look at that. And with Shari, I would love to talk to you some more afterwards this to just hear more about the concerns and some of the research you're seeing. Again, I agree with you. It's not ready for prime time, but I think it's something in the future. I would not want to put this into real patient situations where we're depending on it, but I think the ability for us to scale a very, very limited resource in terms of the people who can provide that care is a really interesting space to be. So I'm going to end up today, just close out today, by just putting one key thing here that's really important. One of the biggest challenges I feel like when we're building all of these AI tools, pulling together our AI strategies for our organizations and for ourselves, is that we need to put empathy at the center of all of these. So it's one thing to understand your customers in order to sell them more things. It's another thing to develop AI with empathy at the middle to truly understand what your customers want. And if your customers really want to be left alone because they just bought something from you, then we need to be able to honor that. And that's the type of empathy that I think we really want to have. Do we want to build this type of empathy to serve our needs? Or are we using these tools and empathy to serve the needs of the people we are trying to support? Our customers, our clients, our patients, our students. If we really want to do that, then we really need to tune these AIs with the empathy tools that we are building into them to understand their needs to serve them and not to serve us and our needs and the things that we're trying to accomplish. So I think this respect that comes from having empathy for the people we're building these tools needs to be at the center of everything that we do in AI. And so often today, it is not. These tools are being tuned for our own purposes, not for the purposes of our customers, our clients, again, all of the various constituents that we have. And I think the last point I would say is, where could we use more empathy in our lives? Where are the places where we are falling short as humans? In everything from understanding a situation to when we're tired of being able to identify the biases that we're bringing in, to just being able to understand in a situation in a meeting if things are going awry and you're not picking up on the clues. So, where are the places where we need more empathy? And how could we think about the tools that we want to have in our own lives as leaders of our organizations, leaders in our families and communities to be the best humans we can be? All right, so that's what I have for today. Next week, please join me. So I'll be here again at Tuesday at 9 o'clock next week, May 30th. And I'm going to talk about how to never fail again. Who would love to learn how to never fail? And so we're going to talk about how do we think about failure. And I'm going to give you some techniques to guarantee that will guarantee you that you will never, ever fail again in anything that you do. All right, so tune in next week and we'll talk about failure and all its different nuances. Take care, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.